The Roman Empire was the last of the great empires that ever existed on Earth. It replaced Alexander the Great's empire and lasted about 1,500 years. The Roman state did not arise spontaneously. Another civilization stood at the origins of the great Roman Empire. The Etruscan civilization appeared explosively somewhere at the turn of the 8th and 7th centuries BC. The Etruscans, or Tuscans, as the Romans called them. The Greeks called them Tirrhenes. The Roman name of the Etruscans has survived in the modern name of the Italian region Tuscany. The Etruscans settled in what is now Tuscany, perhaps the most favorable area in terms of human life. Yes, the land here was not as fertile, but it had the richest ore deposits. There were numerous bays for ships, numerous forests, water resources, indeed, even excessive water resources, so that irrigation had to be practiced here. In each of their areas of settlement, the Etruscans created sacred unions of 12 cities. The number 12 was sacred to them. From the Etruscan civilization, a very rich archaeology has come down to us. A great number of different objects that were found primarily in Etruscan tombs. There were entire necropolises, cities of the dead, with hundreds of different burials. The excellent microclimate inside these tombs allowed even organic remains to survive. So there was also a find of an Etruscan war. It was made in 1823, a perfectly preserved body with a tanned face, fully armed. But there was one problem. As soon as fresh air gets in there, all objects made of organic materials immediately decompose. And so this warrior, whose description is given in the story of the discoverer of this tomb, immediately disintegrated into small pieces. The Metropolitan collection owns a small sculpture of a warrior, a bronze statue of a warrior from the 5th century BC. The spear is intact. The shield is decorated with alternating /concentric stripes, zigzags, and a central protrusion. The breastplate is decorated with a pattern of punctures. For a period of time, the Etruscan kings ruled Rome. The Etruscans gave the world their art of engineering, their ability to build cities and roads, arched vaults of buildings and gladiatorial fights, chariot races and burial customs, skilled metallurgists, shipbuilders, merchants, and pirates. They sailed all over the Mediterranean, absorbing the traditions of different peoples, while creating their own high and distinctive culture. It was from them that the Romans borrowed the architecture of temples with cladding, craft techniques, the practice of building cities, the secret sciences of the haruspic priests, who guessed from the liver of sacrificial animals, the flash of lightning and the stroke of thunder, and even the custom of marking the victory of generals by triumph. Young men of noble families were sent to Etruria to study, and Greek cults and myths penetrated into Rome through Etruria. Knowing all this, it becomes clearer what the greatness of the Roman Empire grew out of. 3,000 years ago, a tiny settlement on the Apennine Peninsula grew into a global empire. To the north, the mysterious civilization of the Etruscans. To the south, the Greek settlements. The founders of Rome considered themselves descendants of the Trojans, who escaped after the Trojan War. The descendants of Aeneas. According to legend, Rome was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus, to one of whom the city owes its name. And as is customary, one killed the other and became sole ruler, the first king. There were 7 of them in all. The legend of the she-wolf who raised the brothers is known. There is a version that this city was a haven for outcasts, slaves, and all kinds of rabble. It was an open city. Immigrants were granted citizenship. We know little about the early days of the city. It is known that the last kings were Etruscans, and it was from them that Rome borrowed the organization of the political system and the army, as well as gladiatorial fights, aqueducts, and even the Latin alphabet, the calendar, the sewers, the temple of Jupiter, and bridges. With Caesar's assassination comes a new world order in the empire, and the power of the Republic will be placed in the hands of the first emperor. Portrait ivory head of Emperor Augustus, c. 27 BC to AD 14. In addition to life-size statues in bronze and marble, miniature portraits of Augustus on coins, gemstones, glass medallions, and statuettes were common in various media. This head belongs to one such statuette, carved during the emperor's lifetime. Sardenec's cameo portrait of Emperor Augustus, c. AD 41 to 54. The cameo depicts Augustus as a triumphant demigod, wearing an aegis, a cloak usually associated with Jupiter and Minerva. Here he adorned with the head of the wind god, perhaps intended as a personification of the summer winds that brought the fleet from Egypt to Rome, and thus an indirect reference to Augustus's annexation of Egypt after the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra in Rome, 31 BC. Rome of the times of the Republic produced sculptural portraits of astonishing quality. The masters reversed the Greek tradition and showed us the true face of the citizens of the great city. A man can be old, eye-set wrinkles, or be a nice boy, and his nose can be long or short, and not depend on the canon of Greek beauty. Yes, and his figure may be a little full, without perfect forms. But that's exactly the value of a republic. Of course, Rome of imperial times tweaked things a bit and made many emperors more handsome, applying the so-called principle of decorum, propriety, adornment, glorification, the artist. And back then, this concept didn't exist. Embellish the customer a little bit. The portrait would continue to follow this principle for millennia. But even so, we recognize Caesar and Caligula, Caracalla, and Marcus Aurelius. We know them by sight, and that is the main principle of portraiture. But sculpture and architecture dominate the arts. Under Hadrian, the first dome building is built, and he elevates his beloved Antinos to the statues of God. Shocked by the death of Antinos, Hadrian, who proved to be a passionate advocate of classical Greek antiquity, as well as a benefactor of the Oracle of Delphi, ordered that statues of the beautiful boy, whom he so passionately loved, be erected in all the shrines and cities of his vast empire. The tradition of portraiture fluctuates from harsh realism to idealism, and back again, but the basic features remain. Already under the emperors of the Sever dynasty, naturalistic begins a smooth movement towards simplification. The rudiments of this style can be seen in the portrait of Caracalla. In the foreground stands the requirement which was peculiar to the first period of Roman sculpture, the characterization of individuality, of character. In the atmosphere of wild and troubled times, refined effects which only the cultural eye could guess were not in demand. A new, more visual and brutal style was required. Emperor Caracalla was the eldest son of African-born Septimius Severus, a Roman general, later emperor, and his wife Julia Domna, a native of Syria. So much for tolerance in ancient Rome. He received an excellent education, which was well versed in Greek literature, but later despised scholarship and scientists. Very interesting utilitarian household items. At times, they look modern, but we should not forget that these items are often up to 2 million years old. It is impossible to say exactly when and by whom the first fork was created. According to one of the versions suggested by the internet, The history of the fork begins in the Middle East in the 9th century. The history of forks in the Middle East goes back to the 9th century. According to another version, the history of the fork begins in Byzantium in 1072. It was invented by Princess Maria of Iversa, a Byzantine princess, who considered it humiliating to eat food with her hands. The first fork she made was of gold. The mother-of-pearl inlay was a decoration for the ivory handle. Apparently, all these pseudo-researchers did not roam the halls of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Before us, silver spoon and fork, c. 3rd century AD. This elegant and unusual eating implement can be used as both a spoon and a fork, the latter designed more to take food from a serving dish than to eat from one's own plate. The handle is decorated with a spotted panther, an animal often associated with the god of Dionysus. Bitter bowl of the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire has got Flavius Romulus Augustus, nicknamed Augustine. Romulus Augustus was about 15 years old when he ascended the throne, and probably even less. The young man was notable for his beauty, which was noted by all his contemporaries. But this was too little for ruling a dying empire. On September 4th, 476, Romulus Augustus abdicated. Next, the territory of today's Europe was in flux. A new life began to form in the great cauldron of nations. But we will learn more about this in the following videos on the Middle Ages.